So I guess we're live here. Hi, everybody. Kyle Cordes at Oasis Digital, as are my colleagues here who would introduce yourself. We're ready for Code Talk Teach, our kind of tech talk show today. Go ahead, Paul.
Hey everyone, Paul Spears. I lead the Angular Bootcamp curriculum and instruction at Oasis Digital.
I'm David Moore, and I'm one of the instructors for Oasis Digital as well, and I'm also one of their consultants.
Yeah, just reminded me, I think maybe for a future edit of our show format, we will delete the introductions. It occurred to me, maybe we'll just start dropping right in the middle of things, a reference to our topic today. So our main topic today is going to be joining a project midstream, how that goes, how to do it, how to make it go well, what can go wrong, that kind of thing. But as usual, while a few people arrive, we kind of talk about smaller things of the week. So I guess hot off the press news, like 10 minutes before we started this, there is a tweet that Misko Hevery is departing the Angular team. So if I remember right, was he the very first person creating AngularJS?
AngularJS, yeah.
And then somebody else stepped in to join him shortly thereafter. I'm trying to remember who. I don't remember the name so clearly, but that's really interesting. That's I guess that means the AngularJS era is winding down, right? If the person that kicked off JS is departing, I know there's still plenty of people that are working, especially on Angular 11. Is 11 the current version now?
11's out. 12 is coming.
Yeah, 11's out. Yeah, 12 shortly. Yeah, so that's very interesting stuff. And of course, this is interesting. So he actually announced where he's going.
Yeah, he's going to Builder.io, which is a codeless site. So evidently he'll be working on the dev behind it.
Like a what's the big buzzword? Not codeless.
Low code, no code.
Low code, no code. Yeah, there you go. That's the buzzword. So interesting. Yeah. So there's a little historical tie-in there. In the earliest days of AngularJS, it was actually imagined as maybe being more like a low-code, no-code tool, and then it evolved into an application development framework for coders. Mm-hmm. So maybe this is Misko's going to go take another swing at being a part of a project more like the very day one, day zero vision of AngularJS. I'll definitely have to throw that in my bookmarks or whatever to see how that project comes along.
Yeah, he's coming on as their CTO, so he definitely will have the ability to make those kinds of decisions. So
cool, yeah. I know that low code, no code just gets so much attention out there. Really hot area. I've been doing this long enough that I'm pretty skeptical of it, but I'm also eager to see it work well. I've worked on many projects which were successful follow-ups to things that couldn't get to the finish line in a sort of no-code app builder sort of way.
I don't know. I think the market has expanded so much in the last 20 years. Like the accessibility of building something and getting your built thing in front of real people to use, like the market has asymptotically grown. Anyone who can, drag and drop something can now put that in front of other people to use. So while I agree with you fundamentally in terms of many enterprise scale needs, like, my son is 7 years old and is using no code tools to build games today. And so just like there's so much potential there that it hardly matters that enterprise may or may not care about it.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, 10, 15 years ago, the money just wasn't there. The market wasn't there. But now the money is there to develop the tools so that people can develop applications without code. Builder.io is where Mishko's going, is just an example of them. I know Microsoft has several other examples.
Yeah. There's hundreds of them, right? Hundreds.
Yeah. But
Google has one.
To the point, I mean, it is not at the point. I almost said never will be at the point, but it's not at the point right now that it will ever that they're gonna be a true enterprise sort of large application built with these things, because there's always some sort of business logic that the no code does not. It's not standard as part of a no code thing that has to match across a bunch of different applications. It's going to be very specific to that application, and a lot of the no code, low code stuff won't be able to handle that.
Yeah, I think that it's good to qualify that as like a right now.
Yeah,
because I think there are definitely applications we've built on that somebody maybe could have got 95% of the way there, or maybe could have relaxed some of their solution constraints in such a way that they solved their business problem with a no-code solution, even though they could have not have built the exact same app we built for them. And I think it's important to differentiate those, that a big go-to tool with low-code, no-code is not find a way to bend this thing to my exact will. It's I'm saving a lot of time and money by taking this approach, so I'm going to adjust my human processes and needs to get a close enough match and make it work. I think another wrinkle that I think is pretty important is there are many kind of apps out there that are really more like content than they are logic or functionality. Like you can imagine a world where instead of Reddit, there's literally a separate app for each subreddit. And I think that over time, there has been this industry-wide motion from a few generic tools to 30,000 different specific tools. There are so many problems that we solve today with bespoke software or specific pieces of software, which, we solved those exact same problems a couple decades ago with Excel. And we solved 50 different problems with Excel that today we might have 25 different SaaS subscriptions and then 25 different little, other kinds of little toolets to solve certain problems. Of course, there's trade-offs. I'm not saying one is better. But
I mean, there's a bunch of different things, like how many different to-do list apps are out there. And yet sometimes the easiest and quickest way to do a to-do list is straight up pencil and paper.
Yeah, sure. It's just start with a Post-it note. That should be your first step, and then get a bigger piece of paper, and then get Excel. Yeah,
right.
Well, I don't think like the problem that you're describing of like having 30 different apps that all do the same thing fundamentally. I don't think it's a software problem. I think it's a natural product of like our market system.
Yeah,
it's just like the way our market system works is that you have these isolated groups of business groupings that they know that they could go use the other person's equivalent software, but that doesn't create a customer user revenue flow into their world. And so you better bet that they're going to make their own equivalent service, copy of an app, whatever it might be.
Yeah, well, they also create competitive advantage, right? The competitive advantage of having even if you have a only moderately customized tool, can be a pretty big competitive advantage over a new employee arrives and you just tell them, we'll use Excel. Whereas if you tell them, use this tool, it'll guide you down the path. That can be a really big advantage, even if from our point of view as developers, some of the applications developed, we might be like, but that's just a data grid. Yeah, but it can, something that's just a data grid with a few little right tweaks on it can be really valuable to a business or to a community.
Yeah, and maybe Excel has too many options that you want to slim it down to just what data needs to go in there, or just
never be too many options.
A real world example from my personal life is, I do a lot of role playing gaming, and so there's online tools for that exploded over this last year. Roll20, Fantasy Grounds. There's another one out there called Owlbear.rodeo. That specifically their intent that they have kept throughout this last year plus has been it should be easy to set up and easy to run a game in without having to go through a bunch of tutorials or a giant wiki or anything else like that.
So it's like a guided process with a tool that helps you execute that process.
Yes, and it's a very limited specifically limited set of tools.
Keeps you on the path. It does.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so I could,
Interesting.
like, if I was asked to run a game and I needed to use a mapping software, I would grab it because I could get up and running in 5 minutes with a lot of extras that for other pieces of software out there take hours or days to set up, so it's as cool as possible looking, but really all I need is this slimmed down sort of version. So it's in a different competitive space to accomplish the same goal.
Yeah. So before we jump to our big topic, which is joining big projects in the middle, I wanted to make sure we talk about another smaller topic. Our friends at Narwhal have added another increment to a functionality to NX, which is that they already had caching, both local and distributed caching, but until just now, all the computation happened in the process where you typed NX whatever, and they've just done their first step where some process steps can be delegated to other machines. You can run NX over here in kind of a worker mode, and then your main one you run, and it acts as a coordinator or controller, delegating work to one or more workers to try to further speed up builds. Of course, it's very dear to my heart because one of our lines of business is helping customers with Bazel, which of course does that at very large scale and complexity. But kind of an unavoidable truth of Bazel is there's a lot going on. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot to understand. It's going to be very different. So I'm thrilled to see the NX folks where they've made it where if you're working within what you can do in NX, they're making it very, very easy to do distributed computation.
So I have a couple questions on that. I briefly saw it, but I have not dug into it. If I have a client who actually has a very large NX project that I definitely want to look into this, but one of their concerns is shipping their software offsite.
From what I see, I didn't see anything about them offering it as in their cloud hosted service yet. They might. I mean, I would guarantee they're planning to offer a cloud hosted version of this. I really thought the demo I saw was you have to run the worker.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
But NX does the delegation.
Yeah.
Does the splitting in the delegation.
Yeah.
But it will also I've seen before about the caching. It'll still have that caching aspect as well too.
Yeah, they didn't delete the caching feature, certainly.
Cool. Okay.
Obviously, anybody who would consider using a cloud-hosted version is going to have their usual process for deciding if it's okay to use a cloud-hosted service.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking is because like the current project that I'm on, the machines that we're using tend to have a lot of security software on there, so compiles take a long time on those specific machines, and even though they're beefy machines, but if we're able to offload some of that compilation onto another server and then have the results sent back, that might actually be faster, especially if it's cached. If it's like, hey, I'm about to compile this, like, oh, I already have that cached, here you go. That we have a fairly large dev group, and so that could save multiple hours of dev time, which would be well worth switching over to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to be very successful with distributed builds, distributed computation. I know that kind of at the high end of the market, in the kind of the Bazel space, you have projects that basically are only feasible to execute. Like you potentially could not do the product. You would not have a viable business doing the product if you couldn't do distributed computation, because a standalone build on one developer's machine starting from scratch could be over 24 hours or something like that.
Yeah, I've not with Angular, but I've had that with Flex. Not 24 hours, but it was
too long.
Over an hour of compilation, and since it was more or less based on Java, you could effectively cache and only recompile the things that needed to recompile. And we haven't really had that in the Angular space until NX and Bazel have allowed for that.
So Paul, you are, I guess, the resident and expert here and use it heavily in our Angular for Architects class. What are your thoughts on the new distributed build?
Oh, I'm really excited for it. And in the client project that I'm helping with the architecture on, we've had a line commented out that says to do distribute the E2E tests for this once NX supports it. So we have been eagerly anticipating this, not even knowing that they were actually working on it. But yeah, we're really excited and ready to take advantage of it.
What's your thought on likely uptake of that feature among the kind of organizations big enough to have this kind of problem?
I suspect that there'll be a wall. There'll be a huge drop off of.
So there'll be a bunch that adopts, and then like a bunch more that just won't.
Well, there'll be a large number of NX folks, but I think that and a large number of them will do things like caching and using the depth graph to figure out how to run the right kind of commands for the right subset of the work. But when it comes to having the infrastructure in place that allows folks to stand up and spin up environments in which they can parallelize their work, there seems to be a wall. But very few teams seem to be able to make it past that barrier where they can just spin up machines at will.
Yeah, so
and I think that's going to be the primary blocker for people picking it up and using it.
That kind of connects to what David was saying too, right? That on the one hand, there are often obstacles to spinning up some local machines to delegate to the work. On the other hand, there'll be other obstacles to when the Narwhal people offer it, which again, I'm sure this is very close on their roadmap. A hosted build service. There'll be different security approval obstacles to signing up for that. So just creating the software and service is kind of the beginning, not the end of getting kind of our segment of the dev world to adopt distributed builds. Okay, well I got one more thing. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to tell everyone, may the 4th be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have any appropriate items here, but they've been going all over today. So one more thing before we jump into our main topic. And I just want to commiserate with some other folks out there watching that. So here at Oasis Digital, we help our customers with problems. We are suppliers of software development expertise, efforts, labor, I guess. And of course, we have people that work here doing the work. But we get an overwhelming number of unsolicited offers for companies that are offering to supply us with expertise or programming work or something. And I thought, are we doing something wrong? Is it not clear? And I looked at our public presence. It is overwhelmingly clear that we are suppliers in this market segment, not buyers in this market segment. And so that makes me think that if we're getting this much interest, imagine what it's like to be in the position of one of our customers, where it is more clear from their public presence that they are clearly consumers of this kind of service. I really feel bad for just the sheer amount of LinkedIn messages and emails and probably paper mail and probably people knocking on the door. The amount of kind of incoming offers for we'll help you with your computer software problems has got to be just completely overwhelming. Anyway, so I feel bad for you if you're in that position, because it's bad enough for us where it's obvious that we're not in the segment. It has to be terrible if it's for people that are on the buying side of this.
Yeah, I think I got 2 or 3 of those emails just last week.
That's not bad. I get 2 or 3 a day.
No. Yeah, I'm not on a list somewhere yet. I'm just on one list.
Okay, so our main topic today is joining projects in the middle. We had kind of broken this down. I think it's visible on the description of our YouTube thing. So what all do you do to join a project midstream? As prompts to talk about, I have what do you do to survey the current condition of a project you're joining? How do you assess who all the stakeholders are and what they want? How you can help them? How do you should you assess how much technical debt there is? Are there anything important to know about joining a large team effort versus joining a small team effort? when you're joining a project, are you should be more focused on like digging into the technical part deeply, or should you be trying to figure out like the process of how this team or project you're going does things work? How soon can you add value? You know, we join projects all the time. What's a reasonable expectation and goal for how many days, hours, weeks, years, whatever into a project you add value? So I'm just going to throw those prompts out and just sort of see where the conversation goes.
I'm going to say, having been on it from both sides, that it's different depending upon if you're a full-time employee or you're a contractor coming onto a project. If you're a full-time employee, some of the timeline that I think we're going to talk about as consultants needs to stretch a little bit, because if you come in guns blazing and saying, hey, we could do this and we can do this and we can do this, you're going to ruffle a lot of feathers. And
well, I think that's a similarity, not a difference.
Not a good way.
That's a similarity, not a difference, right? I'd say whenever you're joining a project, you should probably always, regardless of whether you've hired on at a company or whether you're a consulting firm brought in to help, you should probably spend some time assessing what kind of help is wanted before you just start blasting people with every idea you have.
Totally. What I'm saying is you're also like the perception of you coming on as a full-time employee versus a contractor makes some of those suggestions that you would make as a contractor. They might not come across the same, knowing that you're a full-time employee, and you know, they're all politics start to get into it and other things along those lines. But in terms of like how I initially go in, I'll just take one of your examples of like assessing the code base. I go in and I'll have get the code as soon as I possibly can, hopefully day one, and pull it down and run it through a code quality inspector. Can't believe I use it like almost every day, and the name just escaped me.
SonarQube is SonarQube, because that's the one everyone uses every day.
Yeah, there's always a pairing of like SonarQube and Veracode. Veracode's more on the security side, but SonarQube generally gives me a good kind of health of the code base and see how it goes to, like, you know, some code, some standardized code analysis.
So let me see if I'm summarizing that right. So as you join a project, you recommend like hold back your thoughts for a few minutes, because you know how long you hold them off may depend on like the role you're joining in. But like to do that assessment of technical debt, you might want to just start by reaching for an off-the-shelf tool and maybe use that to just like quickly get a broad assessment.
Yeah, to get the very, very high level view of like, it gives you a very high level view of like not only how are they coding, you know, but like, are they coding to good standards? You may have some developers who came on without a lot of experience, and a lot of experience to best practices, or you may have a case where, oh, this project initially was a POC and turned into a production project, so there's a lot of bad code that's really old as well.
All of my POCs have been turned into production projects, and some have helped profitable companies operate for decades since. So I'm actually, you don't need to be sorry. It's good. It's a good thing.
It is, but it can also be something that really hurts the project in the long run. If you're writing a POC as fast as possible, usually you're jettisoning best practices and writing tests and all that kind of stuff at the very beginning. But if you're if you have those ideas in mind as you're coding the POC and you don't jettison like all of it, all the good things for a long-term project, then yeah, POC can definitely be upgraded to a production quality piece.
There's so much to say there.
Yeah. So, but I don't want to get too distracted on starting.
That could be a main topic on its own.
Well, no. Not only can it be a main topic, David, you weren't with us last time 2 weeks ago on the channel, so I would tell our viewer or whatever. firstly, you should always like and subscribe every YouTube video you see. But go look, and if you just literally look at one video back from this, we spend an hour and a half talking about how to launch a project. And so we will inevitably mention more things today about launching a project, but today we're trying to talk about joining midstream. So you were talking about using a tool because there's often a lot of code. And I was going to offer like a different approach that I often take. I very rarely have reached for a tool at the beginning. I tend to just start randomly opening files and reading them. And then I tend to like start at the topmost files, like, hey, go find the script that builds this thing and kind of start following the threads from there. And then on a whole different access, go get to know the people involved. Like set don't spend, I wouldn't say spend if you're your first week on a project, maybe spend half of each day digging around getting to know the code. Maybe spend the other half getting to know the people. Now, Paul, I'm sure you're gonna tell me that I'm missing something important. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I actually have a pretty set process that I go through when I join a project, at least at the high level. And there's kind of like three things that I do on every project when I join. I make sure to try and do and get across. And the first is actually echoing what David said earlier, which is like I start by shutting my mouth. They know they have problems. They know they need help. They know things aren't going well. That's why they brought you in. You don't need to tell them that their code is terrible. You don't need to tell them that they've got problems. They know that. Like my job now is to like shut up and actually hear what their problems really truly are. And so like don't go in promising the world because like their problems may not even be caused by them. Like it could be that, like David was saying, politically there might be something that is like not possible for me to fix because it's not a technical problem. And so that's kind of the first thing. And then I'm going to use the classic prison analogy, and I find the biggest baddest dude in the yard, and then I go beat him up. But it's in this case the analogy is not that I'm finding another developer team member. It is I go and try and find the most pressing issue that team is experiencing that day, and I drive straight to the heart of it, and I start tackling it. And it's just one of those where I have to earn the trust. I've got to earn the respect. Just because they understand that they have problems and they brought us in doesn't mean that anyone else other than the person that brought us in has any reason to trust or believe that we're going to deliver for them. And we need to establish that early.
I've heard several variations of an expression that go along with what you're saying, Paul, and that's the idea of I was trying to give the abstract combined version. So like, what is the worst, hardest, most important problem in your work, and then is that what you're working on, and why not? So it's like what if like why aren't you working on the most important problem? And so I think that is a good orientation. Is what's the most important problem, and why wouldn't I be working on that one?
Yeah, the term yak shaving is often used as like a pejorative, but that's kind of what your job is when you first come in. Is you're like, what's the big problem, or what do you need me to work on? Why do you need me to work on it? Well, there's an underlying problem. Why is this thing not there? Why is that thing not there? And you have to shave that yak until it's bald. Until you get a really good grasp on the history of the project, knowing the levels of developers that are currently working on the project, maybe who have worked on the project but maybe recently left or something, and getting down to the nitty-gritty of it's hard to put into words sometimes because each project is different and each project has its own problems, but just getting a good handle on why did they bring you in, and what they say they brought you in for isn't necessarily what they really brought you in for. They know what they think their problems are, but sometimes that's a mask on top of what some of their real problems are.
So there's famous advice, and by Jerry Weinberg. I think he passed away a couple of years ago. He wrote a number of books, which I recommend every consultant read. If you start with a book called The Secrets of Consulting and go from there, one of the things he points out there, and this is like advice from the 60s to 70s, is there's always a problem, right? Because you'll be hired to bring as a consultant, and then everyone will say there's no problems here. There's always a problem, and it's always a people problem.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
So I got through 2 of my 3. The third one that I do when I show up is I make sure to show that I'm absolutely unstoppable when it comes to delivering something.
Yeah.
Like the how big the something is totally irrelevant. It is the fact that I got a thing to the finish line that is most important. I've had a situation where I wasn't in their systems yet. They didn't have a VM for me to work in. They didn't have a laptop for me to work in. I was literally showing up to meetings on a computer that was not controlled by them, and all I was able to do was to ride along. Nevertheless, I said, hey, I hear you guys are struggling with figuring out what path to go down with creating this visualization. Let me work something up and I'll get back to you. I basically created a mental snapshot of what they were trying to achieve and wrote up a proof of concept using 3 different technologies that showed how to do this. I threw it in stack lists and I said, here you go. Like, here's working code that acts as a proof of concept for the problem that you were trying to solve. And I gave them a link that included my solution as code. I had another client where I had a laptop, had access to the code, was working on it, but for whatever reason, they couldn't figure out how to get me right access to the repository. Well, after I finished up the item, I created a Git patch file and I emailed it to the project lead and had them apply it to the repository. Like, just do literally anything and everything you can to deliver something. So
I'm going to quote our company website, and I'm just gonna put it here in the chat. It's just one sentence. I think that might be one of the most sentences on there. Working software is our highest priority, and that goes right to what you're saying, Paul. Don't let anything stop from producing a working software, a working system, a result of some kind. Let me see here. So one idea that we talked about kind of at the very beginning is kind of looking at a system kind of top down, right? David talked about, let's point sonar cube or something, just like understand the scope. So I've applied the technique quite a few times now where I first look top down. I often look just by a kind of random sampling, probably harder to look with the tool. That's a really good idea. But I tend to then not solve the hardest problem first, right? So there's an idea of, well, what's the hardest problem? Why aren't you working on it? I have often found it very high leverage to intentionally start with small problems and start delivering faster and faster with small things, building up toward big things. And I think that sometimes starting with small things and delivering a bigger and bigger thing each day or week, whatever, might be the fastest way to start delivering big things. Because it is so common in software projects for a person or even a subgroup to take on a big important problem and then to just struggle at that problem for weeks or months on end and not get something delivered, shipped into the running software. So I think when joining a project midstream, there is often tremendous advantage to be unstoppable, starting with small things, getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
I mean, it's hard to, like, the current project I'm in, 150,000 files. It's if I took on a big problem right off the bat, I wouldn't be able to deliver anything really for months because I wouldn't understand the code base. Even though I've had years of experience in diving into code bases and understanding them, sometimes these problems are so interlaced or have spaghetti code or have issues. Part of the issue is on the back end, which I don't normally deal with. So starting with those small problems gives you an opportunity to be delivering constantly, but also helping you to understand the code base and the structure of that large problem so that you can tackle it toward the end, or at least give like mentorship to the rest of the dev team on how they can handle that large problem, because it might not be a one-person problem.
And I guess I should have also qualified my statement a little bit by saying that it also matters like who and how you're joining midstream. For example, the examples I was thinking about were where I was coming in as an architect into a project, not as a mid or senior level developer, but as an actual architect. And we already had other Oasis Digital team members who had been working at that project for some time. So I also had the backing and support of team members who were already delivering on behalf of Oasis. So that gave me leverage and some time to figure out, like, okay, we are already delivering, we're already making progress, we're doing a great job already. And actually, this is why I love, Kyle, your subtitle, this one of "Don't Screw It Up."
Yeah.
And so I could afford to go and find, harder problems, bigger problems, because one, that's what they really wanted me to be doing. Yeah. Because we already had the other senior developers in place, and two, I knew that I wasn't going to delay or stop the project because we had other reliable Oasis team members driving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, what I was thinking when I wrote the "Don't Screw It Up" was I think it is definitely possible to kind of do things wrong as you join a project that can greatly delay how soon you can really deliver value. And
totally agree.
Nobody appreciates that. Connecting to something you said, David, I think that in some organizations there's like a greater tolerance for people taking a long time to deliver value if they're kind of joining as an employee versus coming in as a high-powered consultant.
Usually because of cost.
Well, but I really think in terms of like doing our best work as developers, we should probably kind of ignore that and try to do a good job entering a project, kind of regardless of the context that you come in under. Right, even if you join somewhere, full time, permanent, whatever permanent means, I don't think it's actually smart to use that as an excuse to plan on taking 7 months to deliver your first bit of value. I actually think it's smart to do the exact same things you would do if coming in as a consultant, and just try to find ways to start helping the team get better results or more results soon, or at least soonish.
Yeah, totally. That goes, like, say I'm going in as a full-time employee somewhere, finding those small pieces that can be done quickly, I think shows that I can be trusted, shows that the things that I do are smart or via best practices, et cetera, and work. Like, I might have identified a couple of the really big problems, but that also, shows that I can produce things really quickly and have those big problems in my head or on a piece of paper. And when I get to that point, I will have built that trust with that team and say, hey, we have this big problem. I think I know how to solve it. Let's go ahead and dig in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it might sound like we're saying two different approaches, but I don't really think we are, because when I'm talking about like going after like the big problem, like the way I deliver that is incrementally.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like I didn't wait until I solved the whole problem to ship something. It is I've checked in 4 or 5 branches along the way that solved incremental problems towards the big problem. And I'm doing exactly what you said, which is my very, very first commit was a 1-line change that fixed a configuration file so that I could use my local environment just as well as everyone else could.
Yep.
Yeah. That's my first commit.
It is great to have your first ready to merge item be a 1-liner. That's great.
One of the other things that I've done in a similar fashion is if I go into a project and I run it and I see a whole bunch of warnings during compile or a whole bunch of warnings on in Chrome, tracking down those warnings and fixing them may not seem like a lot, but it's less.
It's a lot.
It's less that you have to sort through, that are hiding the actual errors, and sometimes those warnings are hiding those errors.
Yeah, quieting bogus errors has just tremendous leverage toward getting better results on a project.
And it usually, one, it gets you more familiar with their code base and their style of coding, but two, it will usually show you that shape of those bigger problems as well, and may uncover the reasons for those bigger problems as well.
So I want to key off a word you said, David. So how long? So this might be a function of how big the project is or something, but how long from day one when you join a project midstream is it from when you stop saying there and start saying our?
It's a good question. I would say probably between a week or 2 weeks at most. Mainly because saying our does make you part of a team. So it's a conscious thought, like when I'm talking here, I'm saying there because even though I'm talking about my current project, because you guys are not part of my current project. But if I were talking with the team, I would say our. So I would start saying our with the team that I'm working with as soon as possible. And
well, let me ask it differently. How long before you're just automatically, naturally thinking our? Not so much as a conscious choice, but like how long does it take to feel part of a project team?
Not much.
Asking.
Yeah, not much longer than that.
I agree. I think a few weeks in, you can really, if you do a good job entering a project midstream, a few weeks in, you can really feel part of that team.
Yeah, it would depend upon how much onboarding there is, like outside of the team onboarding. Sometimes people have a lot of training videos and things like that, which makes it hard to feel part of the team. But
you're saying if your first 3 weeks of a project, 80% of your time is taken up on things other than interacting with people on the project, that slows you down.
Yeah. I've never had a project that took 3 weeks to do the onboarding, luckily, but I'm sure they are out there.
We've worked with folks where it takes several weeks just to get the most basic stuff up and running, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they've built tremendously big, complex, valuable things over a long time. And it takes weeks just to sort of make your way in.
And I've actually worked with a guy who, when he was in the aerospace industry writing code, they didn't trust anyone who hadn't been on the project for 2 years, just because of the mission criticalness that was there. And I mean, there are people that there are devs out there that would not be able to deal with that because they're super smart and know exactly, they have an intuition sometimes that lets them get in there and make those changes. But also those types of people are the ones that project is guarding against, because it's such a huge project that one change over here can break 15 things over there. So that sort of thing.
I think there's an interesting connection to tooling here. Something that I think is just incredibly important about tooling in a project, how you run your source control, how you run your CI, how you run your processes, is to have an incredibly low bar for people to try something, but a very high bar for that something to be part of the shipping software. I think that even the worst programmer on their first day, if they can if there's no buttons they can press on their computer that'll make the plane crash, that's pretty important, right? And that I know that there's a force the other direction. That there are people that believe in this this continuous integration idea so strongly that they want people making fine-grained changes and just going straight into mainline. And I think that does have value, but you kind of have to trade that off between the sort of safety thing that I'm talking about. I think it can be really great to let people start helping right away, but you ought to be able to wait a while before that person can review and approve code into mainline, especially if there's something mission critical about what happens with the result.
Yeah, there's definitely the end of the spectrum of, CI/CD build. I just put in a 1-line change or 10-line change, and it immediately goes to production. But if a plane crashes, rolling back to known good, it's too late.
Not so helpful, right?
So
we don't. Our work here is mostly commercial work, sometimes pretty deep technical work, but I don't think we have ever taken on a fly planes project. And I know that that's one of those. There are certain industry segments where the practices are so different than the rest of the industry that it's hard to even reason back and forth. And certainly avionics software is going to be in a category where everything about avionics software is going to be its own beast.
yeah, but at the same time, some of that tooling works for all those sorts of projects, from the simple website of, oops, I misspelled something, let me roll it back, to a plane where it always has to work. Having good unit tests and good unit test coverage, that's something that I will check immediately when I get into the project. That's where SonarQube comes in to help, is if they've got unit tests, I can run the unit tests and spit out a coverage report, and then SonarQube can tell me, what's covered, what's not, and I can dig into there as well. So,
yeah, I'd like to go back to a question you asked earlier, Kyle, about when did we start saying ours instead of theirs?
Yeah,
and provide a different kind of perspective on that, because I'm in a situation now where, I'm at the architect senior consultant level. I've kind of moved out of the senior dev position where I do lots of development, but it is as a means with which to demonstrate architectural patterns, and proof of concepts of hard technological challenges. And so a lot of times I don't find myself working in their code base. I don't find myself actually building the product up. And there's actually a different kind of political advisor-advisee, trust relationship dance that actually goes on, where I'm not saying ours out of respect for the fact that I don't have any claim to ownership of what is being built. There's just as there is value in saying ours when you are embedded in a team as an external member, there's also value that you can get out of intentionally saying yours when talking to the client, as a sign of deference to the fact that
as a sign of respect.
I have no claim to ownership of what you've achieved.
Yeah, well, I think the right way to say that's going to depend on what your role is and kind of where you are in what kind of shaped project. Definitely.
There was a saying I was told in terms of consulting, is that we can, when we go in as consultants, we can tell the client, here is what we think is the best solution given all of our experience and given our knowledge of your code base. But they're the ones that actually make the decision of, are we going to use this or not? And if they do, great, we can definitely help them. And if they don't, that's their choice, which we may not fully understand their choice, but then we can still continue and work with that and give them what we might consider our second best option. But we can't hold it personally either that they didn't accept the first, our first example, what we consider our best example.
So I'm going to go to Weinberg again. If you are the kind of person who has to have your advice taken, you cannot be an effective consultant, and you should not work in the consulting field.
I would 100% agree with that.
The consulting field requires careful study, and then giving your best advice and being completely comfortable that not all of your advice is going to be right. The right next step for all the people who receive it. And that, if half of your advice really resonates and ends up being taken, then you're actually doing great. You're doing great. If half of your advice is so spot on that somebody takes it and runs with it, you should consider that a success. And you should not even be aiming and certainly not judging your success criteria or becoming angry with people that not all advice you're taking. Paul, those were great. Paul just whipped out and held up two of the books that I was referring back to. These are just absolutely chock full of great stuff. That one is great. That one is so good. I want to connect that
Added to my shelf now.
Yeah. For a while, they were actually hard to get in paper form, and then I think for a while they did not exist in electronic form, although I'm sure both of those problems are well solved. Okay, so we've talked about, I'm just going down my list of bullet points that I had as prompts. So we talked about surveying the current condition. We gave a couple different approaches. So we have even a variation between the three of us of how we survey the condition. We talked about assessing the technical debt, and we talked about different approaches for that. Things like looking at low code coverage is a great example of technical debt. You don't necessarily come waving the report at people with the first day, but just if you're joining a project, you understanding the level of technical debt, very valuable. We've talked about how soon to add value a bit. We kind of hinted on that as we talked about the hour stuff also. But there's a few bits here we haven't really talked about yet. One is, how do you assess who all the stakeholders are and kind of what matters to them? So let me throw these prompts out. The next is, are there any really important things to say about joining an especially small team versus joining an especially large team? How should you divvy your time between understanding the human processes versus the code, the technical bits? Those three things we haven't really said much about yet.
I think it's been my experience that if it's a large team, it's actually a little easier to determine who the stakeholders are, because usually on larger teams there has to be more of a
There's probably an org
rigid
chart
structure. Yeah, there's an org chart.
If there's 50 people, somebody has to have drawn an org chart, and you can just find them and look at it.
That won't let you necessarily suss out the people who have those people's ear, and so you do need to listening in meetings. Watching, Slack or Discord or whatever messaging system, watching the back and forth on that. There's a lot of interpersonal skills that you kind of got to watch those people and see who has maybe an outsized influence on things. It's not as clear cut as code is. Sometimes.
Pay attention in meetings. What else might we do to try to figure out who are the stakeholders and what's important to them so we can serve them well?
See who approves code.
Yeah, right. So if there's a pull request approve process, try to understand what kind of code is going to need who reviewing it. That probably tells you a lot.
Yeah, it tells you two things. It tells you who's trusted to approve code, or and usually it's an or what they think of code pull requests in general, because sometimes I've gone into projects where that was a rubber stamp, and it shows you that they want to do what's best practice, but they also don't quite believe the best practice if they're just rubber stamping things.
Well, I mean, this is a fundamentally hard problem at scale. As you get bigger, having people available to put the time into doing a careful code review that can be the limiting. On some teams, that is the bottleneck on how much work can get done. The availability of the right people to fully consider and review code.
Yep. I've been on a project that has 50% of my time is reviewing everyone else's code. And we had 6 code reviewers
of my
as well.
time is reviewing code.
Yeah. It takes a lot of time, and it's not necessarily viewed as a senior sort of position either in a lot of cases. But that's also where there's also a difference between pull requests and code reviews as well. And usually if you have my experience has been, if you have pull requests, you generally don't have the code reviews, even though you probably could use them on those teams.
Well, some people use one tool for both. So Paul, I think you've been on engagements where You were actually helping people deal with that problem of our limiting factor is there's so many changes to be reviewed and there's only so many people that can do it. How do we help people when that's a limiting factor?
There's very little you can do. It really has
Don't tell
to
them
start.
that.
Well, no, there's little that you can do as the person who's supposed to be helping folks. That they have to get serious about wanting it. When they are serious about wanting it, they will put someone in front of you and say, teach this person how to do a code review. Until they do that, they're not serious about it yet. You can't just go out and magically wave a wand and say, this person's a code reviewer now. It just doesn't work that way.
But that's the recipe, right? Like there has to be like motivation from decision makers and then like deliberate effort to get coaching and help to be a good code reviewer, to expand your organization's code review capacity. So then you can get more.
And then identifying who's going to do that actual work of reviewing and committing to allowing their schedule to allow them to do that work.
Yeah, that last part is super key, is if you say, oh, by the way, you're also now a code reviewer, you've now been trained up, you're now a code reviewer. You also then have to continue to do the same amount of work you did before. That's unsustainable. You're going to burn that person out.
You have to allocate the effort of senior, really sharp people to be part of code review.
Yep.
Yeah.
And furthermore, like a good code reviewer, especially at scale at large teams, I've described them as a code reviewer for a sub team in a monorepo. So let me back up. Mm-hmm. So an environment I've been in, there's a large enterprise scale organization. There are 5 different sub teams working on various sections of this monorepo that they were working on. And we had a team of folks that were kind of orchestrating all of it together, being the reviewers of everything. And they were trying to figure out how to scale that out. That way, if the team over in Europe needed to get a pull request in late at night, they could have a European team member who could do that job well and help them get that code in, and didn't have to wait for us based in the US the following day to wake up and be available. And one of the things I've had to walk these folks through is the people that we bring in, until they see themselves as ambassadors to and from this central organizing body and to and from the team that they were previously on, they will not be an effective PR reviewer. They need to understand that their job isn't just to get that sub-team's pull request into the code base. That is not their job. Their job is to balance the need for the code base to move forward with upholding the body of standards that the core overarching team has put in place for the health of the project as a whole system moving forward. Until that person has shown some sort of indication that they are wearing that hat and that is what they view their responsibility as, they are not ready to, in that kind of environment, move into that PR reviewer role.
Yeah, I've seen people on both sides of that sort of equation. One is, oh, it's a PR. Oh, it looks good. Stamp it. It goes in. Not necessarily. Yeah, right. Looks good to me. And then I've had on the other side of that, I've had people that are like, until this code changes the way that I want it to change, this PR will not go in, and and held up things quite a bit. And there are some things that can speed or ease the burden on some PR reviewers, which is things like automated testing and having a Sonar Cube run through, or TS-Lint or Prettier, any of those other things that can be run as an automated tool as part of the PR process. And so, like, if those don't allow the PR to go in, that eases up the mind space of a PR reviewer to not point those things out. Like in JavaScript, using double equals in JavaScript. They don't have to look for those anymore.
You have to do all that stuff automatically. There's just it's not sustainable to pay humans to review for the number of equal signs.
Yeah,
it's just not.
Computers are so much better at seeing those types of things, and adding new rules to your ESLint, TSLint stuff, or any of your linters. Doesn't matter if we're doing Angular. We happen to do Angular a lot, but all of these languages and frameworks out there have tools like this. And you can, almost all of those tools have the ability to extend those tools. So if there's something that is particular to your project that you can write a rule around, that you want that best practice to improve by, that's one less thing for a PR reviewer to take a look at.
So I want to connect this. We think we might have missed the connection at some point to our primary topic here, which is joining a project midstream. The connection is that at Oasis Digital, we are almost always brought in to be help with the architecture, help with the more difficult parts, help with the code reviewing, help with the process improvement, and that kind of thing. So although I guess the sort of median developer joining a project probably is not joining as a code reviewer, we often find ourselves in that position because that's why they called us in the first place. And so I guess I would give the advice, it's better not to join a project as a code reviewer. It's better to join as a contributor so that you have some slack and some space to learn the code base and learn the problem domain more and so on. And it's definitely more challenging when you're in the position of being brought in to help with the hardest problems or help with the cross-team integrations or code sharing, that kind of thing. But that kind of comes with the territory of being a consultant.
Agreed.
Okay, so I'm looking back at our list here. So here's one we didn't talk about much yet. How do you balance your time between spending time with the people, the process, or the code, the deeply technical? In your first month on a project, what percentage of time do we recommend for somebody to spend in that first month getting to know the people, getting to know the process, digging into the code?
I don't know. To me, it's all kind of one big ball of mud.
Well, yeah, you're gonna be doing all, but
yeah. Well, and I don't even see it as a breakdown because I start with an item. I almost always ask to pair with someone at the beginning to say I don't want to be a burden to you, but I at the same time we will both benefit from sitting down together looking at this.
So try to combine them. That's really your advice is try to find a way to spend in whatever hour you're going to spend. If you can spend that pairing with someone looking at the code,
and then the process, once we're ready to put something in, then
you're gonna engage with all of those concurrently with the same hours,
right?
Not having to divvy your hours. That's great advice.
So let me ask the question, which is, when you say pairing, do you mean are they just working on some random feature, or are you looking to pair with someone to take you through the code,
or
somewhere in the between?
That is all in the details of the project and how and what my role is. If I back when I was doing more senior developer stuff, it was find another senior developer who has time to sit with me, and work with them. Now it's more like, hey, sit with the PM or the product owner, and have them tell me more about what they see the vision of this thing being going forward, and tell me about your process, and what you think about your process, and it's doing that kind of legwork, but it's always from the perspective of of course I can go away and learn this on my own, but that doesn't help you unless I know what this stuff means to you. And that's kind of the key part is I want to know whatever it is I'm doing, what it means to you, what your interpretation of what I'm seeing is, to know how to help you, know who to connect to next, know how to actually be a part of, submit myself to your process so as to help you with your process if that's what I'm here to do. And so, yeah, I try to tackle it in the first few days at least as one big thing. And then after that, it's just kind of a free for all based on a per project kind of solution.
Yeah, I mean, you talking to the project manager and other stakeholders brings up something that I've always either kept in my mind or said to other people on the team, which is, communication in these sorts of situations is definitely going to be key. Getting to know the team in general is something that's definitely needed. If you can't sit down and pair with someone, like, I don't wait for meetings to happen to integrate myself with the team. Sometimes there are projects where there's like meetings all day, in which case I don't have to really
wait long.
Extend out. I don't have to wait long to talk to people, but trying to get who, going back to the stakeholders, trying to get who the stakeholders are and talk with them earlier on is definitely key.
Yeah, I'm going to tell a story. So Bill Odom, he is always telling this story. It's a great story. All credit for the story goes to him. He even tells it better than me, but I'm going to tell it here anyway. And I've used this technique that he describes in the story as, he'll show up. We've got the product owners, the decision makers, the people with the budget and money will have hired Bill to come in and whip their development team into shape and get the project back into a healthy spot again. That way they can start, shipping more units of whatever it is they're trying to sell. And what Bill will do is, he'll sit there in that initial meeting where all the stakeholders are there at the table with all of the developers, and Bill's there in the middle, and they introduce Bill and explain he's going to whip them into shape, and then he kindly asks the project managers and the budget decision makers to go ahead and please leave the room so I can talk with these folks. And when they leave the room, he then turns to the development team and says, "All right, you tell me what's the problem?
What's really wrong?
What's really wrong? What needs to be fixed?" And they always kind of look at him funny, and he's like, "No, seriously, like, no, I just got here. I don't know what the problem is. You folks already know what the problem is. You know where the skeletons are buried. You know which members of management are holding things up. You know what the problem is. The only difference between me and you is that they're paying me an obscene amount of money to tell them what you already know. So if you tell me what the problem is, I'm just going to go tell them, and we can get this thing figured out." And that is surprisingly absolutely true.
Books also a variant of that, Paul. And so I would tell people, unfortunately, you can only read the Weinberg books because he has passed. But Bill, you can actually sit and listen to him. And it's the same energy. It is 100% the same energy.
Bill's great. Hi, Bill.
Nice.
However, we have a very small audience, so I don't know if he'll ever make it into our audience of I think it's currently a single-digit number, unfortunately. But
it's probably can be surmised that he's very busy.
Yeah, I think it's a safe assumption. Okay, so we made it through everything that we said we were going to talk about, and of course we'll keep petering out and talking anything else that comes up. But before we do that, I want to thank our viewers and for any that have seen the pattern. So we talked about how to launch a project, and now we've talked about how to join a project midstream. So in a future one of these, for which you desperately are going to want to like and subscribe so you see it, we're going to talk about how to finish a project. Now, finishing a project is much more difficult than starting or joining a project. And of course, as an example of that, that's not going to be 2 weeks from now. There's other conflicting issues in the way. So at some unknown future date, for which it's really difficult to get a nailed down firm estimate, we will talk about finishing a project. And probably
what he's really trying to tell you is that we're just going to silently move on to other topics and never get around to finishing the series.
We'll come back, but I can't tell you when. And then after we get to that, we're probably going to loop back all the way to before starting a project. Because we started with starting a project, And there's really something that ought to be done before starting a project, and that's like somehow estimating the project and estimating the value of a project and using that to decide whether to do the project at all. So at some point, I'm sure we'll do a discussion on deciding whether to even do a project, because I think that's often the most important part of a project is whether you should even do it. We're usually involved in a project that's already underway where that decision is long made. But I guess we'll promise our viewers at a date uncertain we will address other phases other than joining a project midstream. So any more thoughts that we have today on joining a project midstream?
You've got me on the how to finish a project, or do we even start a project? I have thoughts on these, but I will bite my tongue until then.
Oh, we'll probably go long on those when the time comes. Yeah, so I think we've covered this pretty well.
Yeah, I think my own final parting thoughts is, go in with the understanding that, and I don't think I actually mentioned this, was go in with the understanding that the situation with the code is not necessarily because the people don't care or they're not skilled or anything else like that. There are reasons why the code is in the state that it's in. It may have been needed to be shipped super fast. It may have been, any number of reasons for why the code is bad, or why things are slow. And it's not necessarily anyone's individual fault. And so going in with the sensitivity that, hey, I'm here to make your life better, in coding in this thing, goes a long way to, instead of going, hey, this code sucks and we're going to make it better. It's and it goes back to, the Bill story. The devs do know why it's bad, but they may not have the control, or the ability to, or they may not think they have the control or the cache or anything like that to make those changes. And they may need you to help step in and be their advocate.
Paul, any parting thoughts? Joining a project midstream?
No, I think David nailed it.
Yeah, I think we might have covered this one as effectively and succinctly as any of our topics to date. I think we're going to be able to wrap it up here at an hour and 15, which is great for our viewers who like short things. A couple of our recent ones have gone almost 2 hours, which I'm sure are getting annoying for some people. But okay, well, great talking with you gentlemen today, and we will, for all of our whoever watches this, we will be back on future episodes on other software development topics. So
it's good talking with you all.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.